Yeah, fibrosis itself can cause atrial fibrillation. Good. So then how is it really useful? Is that in those areas there is increased automaticity of the myocardial cells. So if you can burn those myocardial cells which have increased automaticity, which are likely to give rise to propagate the atrial retrograde towards the atrial AV node. If you can block that, then the atrial activities will not reach the anywhere. So the number of hits to the AV node, like in atrial fibrillation 300 to 400, will come down anyway. So automatically the atrial fibrillation will come down. So that's the theory behind the RF ablation. Whether it works or not, again we need a judgment. So RF ablation in 100 people, RF placebo ablation in 100 people, follow the outcomes. So somebody will present that journal club tomorrow. And have we exhausted everything in atrial fibrillation, or somebody has to contribute more? Other PGs, would you like to contribute more in atrial fibrillation? Like if you write this much, how much marks will you get? Out of, well, how much marks will this question be? Any ideas? 10? 10 marks is this question. So will you get 5, 6, 7? Now as the MD examiner, I have taken the theory, corrected the theory for the last 2-3 batches. So, I mean, that's my personal opinion, is I felt horrible. Because everything is just copy-paste and there's nothing there. You have to just see as to how much he has copy-pasted and give a number. So most of the time we'll see how much volume you have put in and some keywords which you have put in or not. Whether you have answered that question which has been asked. So those things have to be done for legal purposes, and then we'll just give you an approximate number based on so many factors. So you have to keep that in mind when you're writing your theory. So you have to arrange your conceptual model in such a way that the examiner sees the right things and then gives you. So you will be probably, setting this up, whatever you have right now discussed in atrial fibrillation, in a proper manner, so the examiner can give you about 6 or 7, depending on how big generous he is. Isn't it? But have we left out something? Can we add something more to this to get some more marks here? Radha? Yeah, treatment of valvular air. Is it different? Yeah, anticoagulation. So you want to go to the detail of it after the DC shock and before the DC shock. So how is it different? Let's say, a chronic atrial fibrillation, valvular myelostenosis. So you anticoagulate before that, and after that, how will you anticoagulate? There is a difference. So Radha would like to talk on that. Okay, so when you give the anticoagulation, you give it for 3 weeks before that, and after that you continue for 4 weeks altogether. Because anyway the patient is likely to throw more showers or trauma, because we are not really able to see them. And we have no idea how and when they will really propagate. So we just have to continue that. And what happens after we finish, after 4 weeks, we stop. Can mishap still happen, and why would it stop? What do you mean by precipitating? Okay, so the cause for the LA thrombus, which is the obstruction, and you know about Wernicke's triad. So thrombus happens when there is sluggishness of circulation, or if there is some roughness of the endothelium, and there is some other factor also. So this Wernicke's triad, if it is fulfilled, so she is saying if there is obstruction, it will always remain. So the chance of thrombus formation will remain lifelong. So we have to continue the anticoagulation lifelong. And if we have repaired it, then the chances, if we have taken it off, we might even stop the anticoagulation. So what are the other situations where we will have to give lifelong anticoagulation in respect of valvular heart surgery? Have you seen some patients who have had their valvular heart surgery done and they are taking lifelong anticoagulation? If yes, why? Why are they taking lifelong? Yes, Katie? Can't hear you. Valve replacements. Those who have had valve replacements, it's a thrombogenic material anyway. As long as it's there, they have to swallow the anticoagulants lifelong. If you have done a valvuloplasty without putting any foreign body, then it's fine. If you have done just valvotomy, no foreign body, then it's fine. But if you have done a valve replacement surgery, which is very common, then you just have to continue till that foreign body is there. So anything more can we add to atrial fibrillation here to increase our chances of getting more than 6, that is 60%? I think I'll give this 60%. I don't know what exactly will give us 4 more marks. Most of the time I just give 6 every time. So that's, but yes, if anybody has some ideas to add to this. Okay, so we'll take a break now and I'll give a little bit of confidentiality. This is our staff here and she came to us 2 weeks back with a history of, yes, what was the history?
A 30-year-old female, she
30-year-old
presented.
lady, our staff, yes.
She's an MRD employee here. She presented to us on Tuesday at around 10:30 for casualty in the night. In altered state, she was having an acute episode, 3 episodes of vomitings, and then followed by loss of consciousness. And she was brought to the hospital 1 hour later by her attenders in an altered sensory. So when she presented to us, the attenders gave a history of there were no involuntary movements of all the 4 limbs, neither there was any drooling of saliva or deviation of eye.
Suddenly became unconscious.
Yeah.
She didn't have any altered state of consciousness before
So
that.
basically,
No hallucinations, nothing. Like how does a person suddenly become unconscious? Maybe I'm just talking here and I suddenly fall down. I don't talk. Something like that.
driving into the history, basically she was accompanied by 2 kids. She's a widow, so she's accompanied by her elder son and the daughter. The son is around the 3rd class. So she had her lunch and then at around 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, she had 3 episodes in a gap of half an hour. And after these 3 episodes of vomiting, she went in and she wanted to have a nap, take rest. And then eventually when her son went and woke her up, she was unable to get up from bed. So he called up the relatives, telling them that he couldn't wake his mom. So those people, they got her to the hospital in an altered state. So she was not waking up. Pupils were normal in size and reactive to light. Daughter was constant. And complaints, basically we couldn't take much history because
So in summary, her altered symptom was that she could not wake. She had gone to sleep, she could not wake. That's it.
she went to sleep, but we never know. She went to take rest and eventually
And she could not wake. So that's it. Now, when you examine her,
examined her for deep vein stimulus. There was flexion of her left upper limb and lower limb, but there was no movement on the right side of the body.
so her right side of the body was not moving when she was applying some stimulation. And that tells us that she had right genitals. So a 30-year-old girl developing hemiplegia. So a youngster.
She was neither a hypertensive nor diabetic.
Yeah, if you can call it a stroke, it may not be a stroke. I mean, it's a young girl with hemiplegia. So what could it be? So now we move to the topic to the PGs. So they have got the topic now. Let us see how much they have got. So they have got a topic where it is hemiplegia, where it is a young person with hemiplegia. It will be young stroke, which means stroke is basically a reduction in blood vessel capacity and circulation to the brain, because of some problem with blood vessel. Whereas it can be something other than a blood vessel. The pathology could be somewhere other than the blood vessel. So the next person will tell us about young hemiplegia as a problem. You can have the short note as young hemiplegia or young stroke. Young stroke is very common to given in exam. Young hemiplegia is, we make it broader. So to say that it's not just vascular, it's something else, we make it broader. So who is going to talk on this? Dr. Ramanujan? Yes. So please give us a mic. So give us the camera. Or we may be able to capture her because this will be seen by everybody in the world. And there will be many UGs whose attendance will be taken based on this belief. And yes, your attendance also will be taken only when, will be given only when you post you PM me 3 important points in the presentations today. What was good about it, what was bad about it, and any other inputs that you would like to do. So these 3 things, and some constructive criticism, some constructive feedback to them so that they know where they stand. So you will have to give this, all of you, about each other, and then that will be your attendance. Okay. Yes. Because you don't give the attendance for physical presence. No. It's only for mental presence or inputs. That way, those people who are staying in Hyderabad are much more present than you are. You give it more importance. When we have their mental inputs, you give that more importance than your being. Okay. Yes.
Transport is one of the common problems we are facing today. Most of the causes may be due to lifestyle modifications. Smoking is one of the factor, and protein proteinase deficiency, hypertension, increasing the risk for getting diabetes in engaged. All these are all the important risk factors for developing stroke in patients. So we have to focus on lifestyle modifications. We have to prioritize the risk groups who have to prone for developing the stroke in future. Those who are risk factors, we have to constantly monitor, and we have to do follow-ups.
So a 30-year-old girl has developed stroke. So you will think of diabetes, the usual atherosclerotic risk. So you think that this is the atherosclerotic vascular occlusion which has caused this problem. Isn't it? So I think before that we should see the MRI so that we can get some idea of the broad spectrum of things which are possible here. Isn't it? So it's not just atherosclerotic. More so in young people it is less likely to be atherosclerotic. It's more likely to be non-atherosclerotic vascular pathology. Like, what are the non-atherosclerotic vascular pathologies? Yes, some inflammation. Inflammation, again, we know that atherosclerosis is also associated with inflammation. But you can have inflammation without atherosclerotic processes. It can be just an immune-mediated attack. And what are those vasculitis? CNS vasculitis. Maybe they have other associations also. So, some other disease associations like a 30-year-old girl could be having a CNS vasculitis because of a lupus erythematosus which she has in addition. So a very important history here would be whether she's got...
known case of pulmonary cause, like 4 years back she was...
Okay, so she was
could it
taking...
be like TB,
Yes, so
arthritis?
she was having, yes, very good. So she was having anti-tubercular therapy. 4 years back she had it. So could it be a reactivation of tuberculosis causing a vasculitis? Because tubercular vasculitis is also very common. So basically an antigen producing a stimuli for the immune system to cause inflammation of the vessel. The same thing happens in SLE, only thing is we don't know which antigen it is in SLE. Whereas in tuberculosis and vasculitis, we know it is mycobacterium tuberculosis. So maybe in this girl, it was because of mycobacterium tuberculosis which has caused the vasculitis. So either way, what are we seeing on this image? So let us look at it. It's unfortunate that we have to see it this way, but it's okay. Maybe this is also good. In a way. Yes. So you see a hyper intense signal in the subcortical area, which is kind of blocking one of the lateral ventricles, the left lateral ventricle. Here, and you can see this actually more of a rounded ring enhancing kind of a lesion. Although we cannot call it ring enhancing because we are not given any contrast here. So it's a rounded kind of lesion, like a circle almost here, and there is a lot of hyperintensity which could be because of the edema which has happened around that circle. So it could be even a tuberculoma. It may not be a vasculitis at all. So maybe it's a space occupying lesion which is a tuberculoma and which has given rise to a lot of cerebral edema for some time. So what was the flare-up of the tuberculoma? So you see, from one topic, which is a broad topic of young stroke, we are going into another topic of tuberculoma. So you see, one topic can have so many subtopics, and each one of them can become short note. Yes, we will now also have a better look at it, because we are going to give you this in the exam. We will give you a case and we will give you the MRI. We will not give you any history, X-ray or MRI without a case. It will be basically all the cases which are present at that point of time, and we will give it to you just to take your opinion so that we can help the patient. Your exam will be only done to help the patient, not you. I can promise you that. So, we are not going to do anything extra for that. Yeah. So there's a lot of things going on here. Can you comment on the image? So you know where you stand as far as radiology is concerned. If we give you this image, how will you know? You can see this earlier. Where is the imaging of the pulmonary tuberculosis? What is the current condition of a pulmonary area where the tuberculosis was?
There is no sequelae to the lung, the X-ray. It is not
The X-ray
showing
is
any
normal.
post-pulmonary sequelae.
So the chest X-ray is absolutely normal. That's interesting. So when she had a pulmonary tuberculosis diagnosis, what was the X-ray at that time? Why did they give her antitubercular therapy? Was it the right diagnosis? Did she have symptoms of the tuberculosis? These are things we need to know. Very, very important. So we'll come back with this information tomorrow. So this is just to start off the process of how we can learn from our cases, and ultimately in medicine everything is learning from the cases. Whatever topics you will be able to tell us, everything is come from a patient. So we will be ultimately going back to the patient all the time. Because as you will realize, there is hardly anything we know in medicine. So we have to work extra to add to that knowledge. Because there currently in the world there is very less knowledge in medicine.
So can this be an AV malformation?
Well, do you think it looks like a AV malformation? Why should the AV
Actually, this
malformation?
sequence-
Why should the AV malformation be so visible? I mean, generally it's a vein thing, and
It's not looking like an impact or
yeah, it is looking like a grape-like cluster, as if it's a coalesced tuberculoma or maybe even a neurocystic tuberculosis, isn't it? So, what is our radiology PG telling us about this? So let us have some expert opinion on this. Yeah, so here is the radiology
no.
Osmania.
Indian photography not also Indian.
Let's see that. Who has brought this here? Brought this MRI here? Yeah, always get the patient attending with you. Never take anything which belongs to the patient yourself. Because if anything gets lost, you will be taken to court. They can sue for an MRI also, 1 lakh. So you cannot afford to pay that money.
Here radiology people they told it's an acute infarct.
No, but told
Sorry,
is
acute
nothing. I mean,
hemorrhage.
you need to
Hemorrhage.
write it. Told doesn't mean anything. So can you comment on the X-ray? So looking at this chest X-ray, looking at everything here currently, very, very uncertain about this 30-year-old girl's
Baby ka
psyche. What have you been doing in the
వెంట్రికల్స్ కలరే ఉంది కదా నా బ్లాక్
Four
ఉంది కదా
hours
పక్కన కూడా సో సేమ్ కలర్ అంటే సమ్
whatever hearing, treatment you get,
ఒకసారి కనుక్కో కదా
we are in the dark. I think this girl went to NIMS also, isn't it?
వెంకటేశ్వరి చెప్పారు
Osmania. What did the Osmania people say about the MRI? Did they get the MRI? We got the MRI.
we got the MRI
And we
sent
did
back there
But
and
we
they
did not get any feedback on the MRI.
and then they have done a CT again to see the extension of the lesion like if it lead on
So you think the CT is a better medicine for extension? Does she have severe anemia and chemotherapy also?
she's having severe anemia sir or like 5.4 but here the platelet count turned out to be around like 2 lakhs
And before that,
baseline
they have given 2 points of RDP, 1 point of PRBC, and her
because the platelet
platelet was 31,000 in Osmania. at one point of time? RVD. Does she have RVD? It is there or not? Do we have a negative report? So you see, currently we are dealing with an image and a 30-year-old girl where we do not know what she has. We are not sure about what the MRI is showing us, and we are not sure about whether she had a tuberculosis. Although she has taken anti-tuber therapy, the X-ray is normal, and whether she really had tuberculosis, whether she was sputum positive, sputum negative, nothing we are sure. That is the current status. So tomorrow we will meet again, and we will try to resolve this case further by trying to clarify these data. And tomorrow, the other PGs will prepare their topics. They have done well today, I think. But I need to have that feedback from you. What was good, what was bad, and you can, whatever bad you feel like you can tell. You can abuse also, and whatever else you would like to say, other than these 2 points: good, bad, and ugly, maybe, or whatever. Okay, so that will be your attendance. And most importantly, questions. If you have some questions which you are shy of asking right now, put it in PM. Okay. And let us give you some attendance and let us see whether you can make you learn. Yeah, what is the time? So we have 10 minutes to wrap up, isn't it? So we have to summarize what we have done today. And who's going to summarize it other than me? Vinod. Yes, Vinod. How have you spent your day today and how has it been bad today? Tell us that. Abuse us. We want to hear all that. Abuse us, it is all on YouTube and everybody is hearing. So we learned about peduncular hallucinosis, something we had never heard before. You had heard? I had never heard about it. But we got to learn about it, and very interesting entity. It basically was like there is a organic lesion in the brain and the person has symptoms, and we try to correlate that symptom with the organic lesion. And then we gave some symptomatic treatment. That's all I think we learned from it. And then we move to the next topic, which is hypoglycemia. Yeah, what did we learn there? Which you did not know before coming here? Pathophysiology you did not know. What is the pathophysiology of hypoglycemia that you learned? You did not know, so you learned something, so you tell us that.
Like how the counter-regulatory hormones grow.
So the blood sugar goes down and the glucagon goes up to increase the blood sugar. So how does glucagon increase the blood sugar? How does glucagon increase blood sugar?
Gluconeogenesis.
So we did not learn this. Deepak, would you like to clarify? How does glucagon increase the blood sugar by counter-regulatory whatever?
Hepatic, we call hepatic gluconeogenesis.
So it pushes the liver cells to produce more glucose and it pushes out the glucose from the liver.
Peripheral
Are I agree to that? Sure? Nothing else? There is no tricks of in glucagon sleeve other than the liver neoglucogenesis.
Decreases the peripheral uptake of insulin sensitive tissues. Glucose peripheral uptake of the insulin sensitive.
Okay, so it does not let the glucose get into the cells so that it remains in the blood. It pushes the glucose out of the liver. And what about muscle breakdown? Glycogenolysis. That might happen, but again, does it happen all the time? When does it happen? These are some of the issues. So you have always got to leave a space to ask questions. If your topic presentation has not left any space for the audience to ask questions or has not stimulated the audience, then it fails in some area. So you have to create the space and make people ask questions. So you will ask questions and you will also find out the answer. Because that is what we want to teach you, how to ask questions and how to find out the answer. We don't want to feed you with fish. We want to teach you how to catch fish. That's the idea. Okay. So yes, hypoglycemia, some mechanisms, yes. And then?
Detoxification.
Oh, that's all. Hypoglycemia, counter-regulatory hormones go on. That's all we learn. Nothing else in hypoglycemia. Okay, some causes of hypoglycemia, iatrogenic and non-iatrogenic. What are the non-iatrogenic causes? Maybe a beta cell tumor, insulinoma. What else? Some kind of elementary surgeries which can, how does it call hypoglycemia? What is this syndrome which we used to study in first year MBBS? Dumping syndrome. So as soon as you eat, it gets all dumped to a place where it's not supposed to be dumped. It's all supposed to be dumped in the stomach. It straight away goes to the jejunum. So what happens there? And what all symptoms does it cause? Yes, so because of the high osmotic load, so it will just pull in the water and it will cause hypotension, dehydration, diarrhea, and hypoglycemia. How? Mechanism? Hypoglycemia and dumping syndrome. Alimentary hypoglycemia. So again, there's a space here for finding out the answer. Do you know the answer? How does elementary hypoglycemia happen? Like the sugar goes into the jejunum, which it should not go. The sugar pulls in water and basically the plasma and causes hypotension, palpitations, all those symptoms, and diarrhea. But why hypoglycemia?
GLP-1 receptors will be stimulated in the gut.
Huh?
Rapid dumping of carbohydrate in the ileum and jejunum. GLP receptors will be activated and there will be rapid release of insulin leading to hypoglycemia.
GLP. So you are saying that GLP-1 can cause hypoglycemia. I thought they were.
No, sir, because it senses the glucose. So the receptor senses the presence of glucose. Without the glucose being absorbed, insulin will be secreted. So insulin causes the hypoglycemia. Rapid.
No, what about, okay, now I wanted to bring this topic to GLP-1 inhibitors. That's what we use most of the time. We use what is that DDP inhibitor? DPP inhibitors, they have also the action of increasing GLP-1 and we use GLP-1 agonists. Yeah, agonists and GLP-1 producers by DPP inhibition. Okay. So DPP inhibition is the commonest drug, the most useless and most commonly used drug which is used. But and then there is this GLP-1 agonists, which are difficult to use, more expensive, we are using the injection. Nowadays we have oral GLP-1 agonists also coming into the market, isn't it? Okay. So if we use them, we think they are good because they do not cause hypoglycemia. That's one of the things that are used to sell those drugs. They hardly ever cause hypoglycemia. Isn't it, Bharat? Supposedly. But we know that if you are using oral hypoglycemic, which does not cause hypoglycemia, what is the usefulness of that oral hypoglycemic? How can you call it oral hypoglycemic? How can you call it a hypoglycemic if it doesn't cause hypoglycemia? So every drug which is supposed to bring down your blood sugar level will cause hypoglycemia. Metformin doesn't do it. I don't think we should call metformin oral hypoglycemia, although it has an action, very delayed one, by reducing hepatic glucose output. But it does something good to the peptide receptors and it somehow improves outcomes. We need to discuss more on that. How does metformin really do? So I think tomorrow's topics we can kind of gauge. Metformin is a very important topic. So if we come here, GLP-1, yes, she brought up this topic of GLP. So slowly we'll go into the subtopics of GLP-1, metformin, diabetes, there's so many things. Okay. So how does GLP-1, basically we were discussing how does alimentary hypoglycemia happen. And Vidya said that GLP-1 is activated. More GLP-1, more insulin release, more hypoglycemia. That is the mechanism she gave. Now she has to give us some evidence. So this class doesn't stop here. It actually starts here and it continues when you keep feeding us with the answers to the questions we raised. So you have to give us some evidence that this is the mechanism which has been proven through empirical trials. Hopefully we will have that kind of a session where we will present on the topic and then we will cross-examine you and ask for the evidence. Okay, you made this statement. Where is the empirical evidence to this? I mean, how did science come to know that this is true? So, what is the time? 8 is the village. Yeah, what did you learn there which you did not know? Before Dr. Kirti's presentation, this is what we knew about atrial fibrillation. And after Dr. Kirti's presentation, this is what we know about atrial fibrillation. That's how article is written. Learning time. So we learned something about pathophysiology, although we don't know whether the hypotheses are really true or not. It could be just my hypothesis. So we have to go and read up whether what I have said is right or not. See, that's very important. And so one hypothesis of how atrial fibrillation happens, pathophysiology, and again how people have actually proven that hypothesis, with what kind of trials and experimental things. Those are the things which you have to work on. So right now your theory is very very copy pasted, very childish, textbook, those kind of childish textbooks stuff which we will read in your answers in the MD exam, which are being presented also. But we want something with more science in it, more experimental trials in it. That's what you need to be able to offer instead of just giving us some textbooks. So that's what we are expecting from you. That will also add more marks to your paper. Otherwise, 5, 6 won't even read it. There's nothing to read. As Vinod said, before this I knew this, after this I knew the same. So you have to always offer something more for us to give you that 4 marks. Otherwise, everybody gets 5 and 6. Just closing the eyes, finish. Done. If you have not written anything on the paper, that will be difficult for us to give you anything. But all examiners want to make you pass. So whatever you write, unless you write something completely off the track, like you attended somebody's wedding and you write everything there, so that will not fetch marks. But yes, if it is on topic, it will get you 5 to 6 marks. So that's the reason you need not be scared of spending time here and exercising your gray cells. If you can write something, you will pass. And what I am trying to tell you is, I am trying to give you the confidence here that even if somebody wants to fail you, let's say I want to fail you because I have not seen much of you in the exam, in the working hours, and I have got this grudge, I should not be able to fail you. You should have that confidence. That is what I am here to instill in you. No examiner can fail you if you are well prepared. I can guarantee you. So yes, I think so. I would like Dr. Rajesh to make some closing comments, and anybody else is open to the house. So tomorrow we get ready for tomorrow. Yes, we again go back to our theory mugging business. But we again come back with some good topics which are in line with your theory. And of course, there will be some 30% questions which will come out of the box, which you wouldn't have. And I'm sure some of it will be from COVID also. And so we will continue our focused learning, of all these particular topics, and from which will be distilled down to the MCQs. So they will also have to get us more MCQs. We didn't give them a chance, but we will give them a chance. Slowly, all of us will get to see and learn from each other. Thank you. So how many CPs do we